Hey Centaurs, welcome to one final AutoCAD tutorial video on coordinates. This time we're learning about something called polar coordinates. This is a really different way of working, and quite frankly, once you learn it, it might be the only one you use. We can also be using the dynamic input when we're doing polar coordinates, as the dynamic input sort of tends to default to accepting polar coordinates. So what are these things? Well, instead of using an x and y like we did for absolute and relative coordinates, this time around when using polar coordinates we are going to be entering the distance of a line and its angle. What you need to understand about AutoCAD angles are that a 0-degree angle is one that faces directly to the right, or if you were standing on a clock face would be at 3 o'clock, and then all the angles are measured from there. Now, as you move in a counterclockwise direction, that angle would increase. I'll show you on the graphic below. An angle that moves in the clockwise direction would be a negative. The other thing to understand is that polar coordinates are relative, just like the relative coordinates we used, meaning that they're measured from the previous coordinate. So how would we enter these in? Well, just like a relative coordinate, we would start with the @ symbol because we are moving from the previous point. We would type in the length of the line, and then we would use the angle symbol, which is the comma on your keypad, but if you hold shift and then press it, you get the angle symbol followed by the angle of the line. So what I just entered in there would create a line moving from this point 10 units directly to the right. Again, I've already mentioned this, we can use our dynamic input. You'll see me use it in the example, but you do have to be careful. You have to be watching what it is expecting from you. Okay, so a couple examples here. If you were to type this, you would create a line, let's say from this point, that would be 6 units long, and it would be moving upwards 45 degrees. So 45 degrees from where? Well, if you had another line pointing straight to the right, this would be 45 degrees. If you were to have this typed in, and we started from this point, you would have a line going straight down 10 units long. Okay, so let's try to understand these angles a little bit better. This little graphic I find quite helpful. So again, a 0-degree angle is one that's facing directly to the right, and then they're all measured from there. So if I go 90 degrees in a counterclockwise direction, that brings me to a perfectly vertical line, and you'll want to remember this one. A vertical line is 90 degrees. If we keep going, another 90 degrees brings us to a straight line to the left. This would be 180 degrees. If we keep going, another 90. So moving straight down would be 270 degrees. And then we can kind of fill in all the between. So let's just look at two more. If we were to go 45 degrees this direction, this would be a 45-degree angle. But we have to be careful. If we go this direction, so let's say this is a 60-degree angle, we would have to type that in as a minus 60 because it's measured clockwise from 0. If that's confusing, hopefully the examples that I do will be helpful, and the one that you're going to draw really isn't that hard. It makes a lot of use of the 0, 90, 180, 270. Those would be the main ones to remember. Okay, just a couple more little mathy type things you've probably done in your math class. The tricky thing with working with angles is sometimes you're not given the one that you needed. So we're going to look at two situations here, complementary and supplementary angles. So let's say you are wanting to draw this line right here. In order to do it, you would need angle B, because here's 0. You need angle B to type in, but maybe your drawing has given you angle A. Let's just say in this example that it's 30 degrees. Now, because both of those angles sort of subdivide a 90-degree corner, we could say that they have to add up to make 90. So if we know angle A is 30, angle B would have to be 60. Now you can enter it. Same kind of situation for supplementary angles. Let's say you're given angle A, and we'll just say it's 130 degrees. Because they fall along a straight line here, they need to add up to make 180 degrees. So angle B in this example would be 50. You can now go ahead and draw this line. There's a couple other examples here that I'm not going to go over. They get a little bit advanced, and let's face it, this isn't a math class. But if you need those, you can definitely take a look. So this will be our first drawing, just a simple rectangle. We're going to approach it much like we did with absolute and relative coordinates. So we'll just kind of type in the points first. So the first thing we would do to draw this is type L for line and then enter. Our first point would be an absolute coordinate, so 4, 3. And then from there we're going to do polar coordinates. So moving to the right here in a relative move, so we're moving 7 boxes to here, and we're moving at 0 degrees. So we could type this in as at 7 angle 0. Moving vertically now to this point, we're moving by 5 boxes. So it starts out just like the relative coordinate, but then we put in the angle, and a vertical move straight up would be 90. Moving to the left, again by 7 boxes. Our angle moving to the left would be 180. And then finally moving down from here to here, we have 5 boxes, and an angle straight down would be 270. Like I mentioned, it'd be really handy to memorize these angles here. So let's move over into AutoCAD. We'll set up our document and draw our first object. This one should be pretty easy. So here we are in a new file. First we're just going to set up our document, so double check in the customization bar that these 4 items are checked. We're going to be in the decimal units, which is the default, so you shouldn't have to change anything. And then we're going to set up 3 different layers. So go ahead and create 3 new layers. Because we're going to draw 3 objects, we're going to call them Object 1, Object 2, and you guessed it, Object 3. Okay, now we're going to keep the line type as continuous, but go ahead and change the color on 2 of them just to differentiate the 3 different objects. So I'll go yellow and green, my 2 favorite colors. Okay, for our first object, let's just make sure we're on the Object 1 layer. And I think I can remember the input, so let's go ahead and get started. We'll type L for line. The first point is going to be 4, 3. Now I want you to take note of the dynamic input. It's already looking for an absolute coordinate there, so if I type 4, it goes into the X box, and I can put a comma to move over, and 3. So you can kind of see how that dynamic input is working. Now notice if I kind of drag my cursor around, it's showing a distance and an angle. And I can use tab to toggle between the 2. So instead of typing at 7 angle 0, I could actually just go ahead and type 7 into the distance and then 0 into the angle. So why don't we try that out? So we're going to put 7 in the distance, press the tab key to toggle over, and then 0 in the angle. So that did the trick. If I hover my cursor around, I can see again it's looking for a distance in blue, and it's showing an angle. Like there's an angle of 60. So I could just type 5 and then press the tab key, and I could either type 90, or because it's a nice round number, I could look for the snap. So just like that. Okay, so now I'm going to type in 7, press the tab key, and this would be 180. So I have all sorts of different options here. I could type 180, or I could just move my cursor till it snaps. So you kind of do what you're comfortable with there. Finally, I'm going to put a distance of 5, and then I'm going to type in 270, although I have to be careful where the dynamic input is measuring from. See, if it's measuring from here going this way, then I want 270, but notice as I moved around here, it actually sort of started measuring in the negative, but it's not showing a negative. So I could just type 90 here, whereas normally I'd have to type negative 90. This is why I find the dynamic input a little confusing for me. So that looks pretty good. How about we do that one more time where let's be purists here. We'll go ahead and just type, so 4, 3. Oops. How about we start with a line. 4, 3. And then let's just go at 7 angle 0, at 5 angle 90, at 7 angle 180, and then finally at 5 angle 270. So I don't know, I actually find that faster and easier for me, but if you prefer the dynamic input, hey, you do you. So we're going to switch to Object 2 now. Let's go back to the notebook and check out what we're drawing next. So here's our second example. This one's a little harder. I'll just show you the way this works. So we're going to start at point A with an absolute coordinate of 1.6 and 4.5. And then we're going to use polar coordinates to move around the object. Now we're given the distance, so from A to B, if we look at the chart, A to B is 2 units. So you kind of see how that works. From B to C is 1 unit. The angles are given, but it gets a little bit tricky in some places. I'll sort of explain as I go. So let's do like we've done in the past. Let's go ahead and just kind of write down what our commands would look like. So the first thing we would need is L for line and then enter, and then our absolute coordinate of 1.6 and 4.5. Now we're going to use our polar coordinates. So moving from A to B, we would use at, and then the distance of 2, and the angle of 0. All right, so far so good. Next, moving from B to C, let's go ahead and put at, and then our distance of 1. The angle, though, this is a little bit trickier. It doesn't matter if you're going to type the coordinates or use the dynamic input. We need to figure out not this angle, we need to figure out this angle. Okay, so do you see what I did there? I just kind of extended this line. So now we can use that supplementary angle thing I mentioned earlier. Right? If this is a straight line and we know 135, our unknown angle here has to add to 135 to make 180. So the unknown angle here must be 45 degrees. Not negative, just 45 degrees. So our command here would be at 1 angle 45. Okay, not bad. So far so good. Let's move from point C to D. So the distance here is 3. So we're going to say at 3. And hopefully you remembered that the angle to the right is 0. Next, moving from D up to E here, we can go ahead and write at a distance of 4. And hopefully you remembered a vertical move going straight up is 90. Okay, oops. Now moving from E to F, we'll just scroll down here a little bit. So moving this way, we can just write in our distance here. So at 2 and an angle pointing straight to the left, that's 180. Okay, now for a slightly tricky one. So moving down to G here, we're given an angle of 120, and it's measured from 0, which is great, but because of the direction it's facing, it's going to have to be negative. So our distance is 1, and the angle is going to be negative 120. Okay, now for the hardest part of this entire example here, moving from G to H. Why is this the hardest one? Well, look at this. We're given angle 80. The problem is that angle is not measured from 0 degrees. It's measured from some other angle. So we need to figure out the angle from a 0 degree line. And here's how I would approach it. So we already know that we have 120 here. If I just kind of extend the line like this, we now have this supplementary angle situation again, where I can figure out this angle because it needs to add with 120 to make 180. So that makes this 60 degrees. Now if I just take 60 and add it to 80, that gives us our included angle. So that would be a total of 140. So 140 degrees. Let's just get rid of some of the mess here. From a 0 line to here would be 140. So we can go ahead and write our coordinate as at 1.5 angle 140. That was a bit of a tricky one. And then let's end on an easy one. So moving from H to I, moving this way, we know our distance is 1.5 again, and the angle straight to the left is 180. Now, why am I saying that's the end? We haven't drawn this line here yet. The problem is we're not given the information. We don't have the angle. We don't even have the distance from I to j. So are we stuck? Not exactly. So we kind of need to stop here. We're going to press escape on the keypad just to exit the line tool. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start back at A and move up to J. We're given a distance here, and we know the angle is 90 degrees. So we're going to type L, our first point again, and then at 2, angle 90. And then once we have both point J and I drawn on our document, we could actually just use the object snaps to click here and fill in our object. So let's slide over to AutoCAD. I'm just going to shrink this down a whole bunch. There we go, that should do it. Let's shrink AutoCAD so we can see. All right. So we're going to be on the Object 2 layer. Now to make sure this rectangle isn't in our way, what we could do is drop down the layers and just on Object 1 click the little light bulb here to make it invisible. So let's start our object by typing L for line. We'll put in our absolute coordinate. Okay, and I'm just going to type these at first. So we're going to go at 2, angle 0. And then at 1, angle 45, at 3, angle 0, at 4, angle 90, at 2, angle 180. Okay, so here's where I kind of want to pause for a second. So you just got to watch if you are doing the dynamic input here. See, I wrote down negative 120 for this move. But one thing I've noticed about the dynamic input is as you drag the cursor around, see it's calling this positive 120, and as I slide around, it's calling this positive 120 as well. So if I type this as a negative, well, why don't I show you? So if I put 1 as my distance, and then press tab and go negative 120, it basically gives me the reverse of what I wanted. So that's a bit of a mistake. Let's get rid of that line. Let's type L. I'll just use the object snap to get back to where I left off. And so if you're using dynamic input, you just have to watch for that. I'm going to keep going the way I was. I'm going to type at 1, angle negative 120, and then I get what I expected. I'll go at 1.5, angle 140. Let's just pan this a little bit bigger here. Where did I leave off? Okay, at 1.5, angle 180. Okay, and so I'm at that final point here, point I think it was. So I press escape, and then I need to start off back at the beginning. So L, enter, 1.6, comma 4.5, and then we're moving vertically by 2 units. So here's where I could maybe just use the dynamic input. I can just move my cursor till it snaps at 90, and I could try to get it on 2, but you notice how it keeps kind of sliding past. I could have set my object snaps maybe a little bit better, or my snap distance, but I'm just going to type 2 and press enter. Alright, and for the final line segment here, I don't need to know the distance or angle. I just bring it up till I get a green square indicating that it's going to snap to the endpoint. If you don't get that, make sure your object snaps right here is turned on. See, if that's not turned on, then it's not going to snap and it won't be accurate. There we go. Okay, we'll press escape, and we now have our 2 objects completed, and you're ready to do the third. So what you can do now is move over to layer object 3, and let's just make those first 2 invisible. All right, last time here, we'll jump back into the notebook and show you what you're doing. So to finish out the assignment, you're going to scroll down, and you're going to create this object on layer 3. I tried to pick a fairly easy one. There's a lot of lines just going straight down, to the right, straight up. There's a few angles, but I think not too hard to figure out. Couple things for you to make sure that you do. First off, make sure you're saving your file in the A drive and call it polar coordinates with your name. Don't forget to create the 3 layers shown in the video here. You can use the continuous line type, but please use a different color for all lines. Don't know how that got erased. And have your unit set to decimal. Okay, you can use the dynamic input if you would like, but do be careful. I prefer to just type the points, but do whatever works for you. Okay, that's the end of the video. Give it a try.